When a group of cocky black belts spotted 12-year-old Maya quietly selling lemonade on a busy street corner, they saw nothing more than an easy target. A girl too small, too silent, too overlooked to fight back. But what began as casual harassment quickly spiraled into a moment no one there would ever forget. Beneath Maya's calm demeanor lay a history few could imagine, and a father whose ruthless boxing legacy cast a shadow longer than the street itself. In the tense hours that followed, a lesson in humility, respect, and quiet strength would unfold, shaking a crowd that thought they held all the power. This isn't just a story about fighting. It's about the dignity earned when you stand firm, even when the world doubts you. Just a quick little pause before I forget. If you like this kind of stories of overcoming adversity and justice, please leave a like and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you're new here, consider subscribing to our channel so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. I guarantee you won't want to miss it. Now let's jump back in. The morning sun in Willow Creek was already warm, spilling light over the faded storefronts and narrow sidewalks. Down on the corner, near the old post office where the breeze carried the scent of baked bread from the diner, a small wooden stand had been set up. Its sign, painted in uneven strokes of yellow and white, read lemonade, $1. Behind it stood a girl, maybe 12, wearing a pale blue summer dress and a worn straw hat too big for her head. Her name was Maya Kerrigan, and though her posture was straight, her hands were clasped in front of her like she was holding herself together. It was the kind of stand most people would pass with a smile or a nod. But not today. Across the street, 3 men in black martial arts uniforms, their belts tied with casual arrogance, were walking in loose formation. They looked like they'd just left a tournament, or maybe they just wanted everyone to think so. The leader, Rex Danner, had the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. His two companions, Colt and Vince, followed half a step behind, hands in pockets, scanning for attention. Maya noticed them, but didn't flinch. She adjusted a glass jar half filled with crumpled bills, kept her gaze on the table. They stopped a few feet from her. "Lemonade, huh?" Rex said, his tone just a touch too loud, meant for the small crowd spilling from the diner patio. "How much for the black belt discount?" Colt chuckled. Vince smirked, looking her up and down like he was judging more than her stand. Maya's voice was soft but steady. $1 a cup." "That's steep," Rex said, stepping closer. He picked up one of the cups she'd set out, rolling it between his fingers. "Bet you didn't even make it yourself." Someone from the diner patio laughed, not unkindly, just going along with the mood Rex was creating. The attention was shifting now, heads turning. Maya didn't answer. She simply reached for the cup in his hand. Her movements were deliberate, controlled, like she'd decided long ago she wouldn't feed the kind of men who needed everyone to watch them talk. Rex didn't let go. His smirk deepened, sensing the tension. Somewhere nearby, a truck engine rumbled. A shadow passed briefly across the street. But Maya's eyes stayed fixed on the cup, her fingers unmoving. The crowd was still smiling, but one or two faces were starting to frown. Rex leaned an elbow on the little stand, his belt ends dangling, the embroidered gold stitching catching the sun. "Tell you what," he said, "we'll taste test it for free, let you know if it's worth charging for." "Sound fair?" Vince grinned wide, glancing over his shoulder to make sure the people at the diner patio were still watching. Colt stayed quiet, but there was that restless sway in his stance, the kind of energy that looks for something to dominate. Maya finally lifted her gaze. Not fast, not defiant, just steady, as though she was measuring the space between his words. "I charge everyone the same," she said. It wasn't loud. In fact, the street noise almost swallowed it. But for some reason, it made Rex blink. "Is that right?" he asked, his smirk faltering for the briefest beat before sliding back into place. "You hear that, boys? She's got a policy." Colt stepped forward, his voice sharp. "Or maybe she's just scared too." He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes catching on something. Maya's hand had shifted, just slightly, to adjust the brim of her straw hat. The movement pulled back the cuff of her sleeve, revealing a faint, irregular scar along the inside of her forearm. Not big enough to be from an accident in the kitchen. Not random. Colt's brow furrowed for half a second before he forced a laugh and looked away. From the patio, the chuckles were thinning out. A man in his 50s, gray hair, denim work shirt, leaned forward, narrowing his eyes at the scene. Rex didn't notice. He reached into the tip jar, plucking a crumpled bill and holding it up. "Let's see if this is even real money," he said. Maya's fingers curled against the table edge. The sunlight caught the edge of her eyes now. Not teary, not angry, just still. Too still for a child being taunted in public. Somewhere down the street, that same truck engine rumbled again, closer this time. A low, even growl. Vince shifted uneasily, glancing toward the sound, then back at Maya. Something about her posture, feet flat, shoulders even, chin level, didn't fit the picture they were trying to paint. The crowd didn't know it yet, but the mood had changed. Maya didn't lunge for the bill Rex was holding, nor did she shrink back. She simply looked at it, the way someone might look at a pebble thrown in their path, deciding whether it was worth moving. Then she spoke, barely above the hum of passing traffic. "You can put that back now." The words weren't sharp. They weren't even demanding, but they landed with a gravity that made a couple of heads at the patio turn in unison. Rex chuckled like it was a joke, but the sound felt forced. "Look at you. Bossy for a little lemonade girl." Maya's hat tilted as she turned slightly toward him. That brim hid her eyes from most angles, but from where Colt stood, he could see them, and he didn't like what he saw. Not fear, not fluster, just a depth, like she'd been here before, in worse places, with worse people. Her hands returned to the edge of the stand, palms down. They were small, but they had that sinewy definition of someone who used them for more than homework and phone screens. She didn't fidget, didn't twist her fingers or tap. Colt's gaze dropped to the scar again, and now he noticed something else, a thin cord around her wrist, hidden under the sleeve, with what looked like the corner of a frayed leather strap tucked away. Not a bracelet, something older, more worn. From the patio, the man in the denim shirt whispered something to the waitress. She froze mid-step, eyes narrowing on Maya. Meanwhile, the low growl of that truck engine had gone silent, parked somewhere close. Rex tossed the crumpled bill back into the jar with an exaggerated flick, making the coins rattle. "Relax. We're just having fun." Maya didn't answer. She slid the jar back toward the center of the table, her movements unhurried. Somewhere in that unhurriedness, in the way she stood like a tree rooted in place, a tension was building. The street's chatter felt thinner now. Even the breeze seemed to pause. If Rex noticed, he didn't show it. But Vince's foot tapped once against the sidewalk, like his body knew something his mind hadn't caught up to yet. The pause after Rex's last remark seemed to stretch. Most kids would have laughed nervously, tried to please, or even fought back with words. But Maya let the silence stand, like she knew it could do more damage than anything she might say. She lifted the pitcher from the cooler beside her and poured another cup, the lemonade's pale gold catching the light. Her movements were careful, almost ritualistic. Pour, set the pitcher down, place the cup exactly at the edge of the table. No wasted motion. Rex smirked again, but it didn't quite reach his eyes this time. "You always this quiet?" he asked. Maya glanced at him for a brief moment. Talking doesn't always help. The answer landed like a flat stone on still water. No splash, but ripples spreading out where you couldn't see them. Vince shifted again, rubbing the back of his neck. He didn't know why that answer unsettled him, but it did. From the patio, the waitress was no longer delivering plates. She was leaning against the railing now, watching. The man in denim kept stealing glances down the street, as though expecting something or someone. Colt's eyes dropped once more to that scar, then to the cord around her wrist. A knot sat in his stomach. He didn't know what the strap meant, but it felt like the kind of thing someone wore for a reason, not decoration. "You sure you're not scared?" Rex said, pushing now, leaning over the stand so his shadow fell across her. Maya didn't step back. She didn't even blink. She just rested her palms on the table and looked past him, not at his companions, not at the growing crowd, but down the street, toward the spot where the truck engine had last been heard. Her lips pressed together in the faintest line, and for a heartbeat, her eyes softened, not with fear, but with something heavier. A memory maybe, something personal, tucked deep. When she looked back at Rex, her face was unreadable again. The man in denim muttered, almost to himself, "That's not fear." No one around him heard, but he kept his gaze locked on Maya, sensing something the rest hadn't caught yet. The hum of the street seemed to change. Conversations from the patio dropped in volume, like the diners didn't want to miss a word, or maybe like they weren't sure if they should be laughing anymore. A pair of teenagers on bicycles coasted to a stop a few yards away, their handlebars still turning lazily. One of them, a boy with a Red Sox cap, asked under his breath, "You know her?" The other shook his head. Never seen her before. But his eyes stayed on Maya. At the corner of the patio, the waitress, name tag reading Lila, stood with her order pad pressed against her hip. She wasn't smiling now. She'd seen this kind of scene before. People with too much ego testing someone who had no way to fight back. Except, this girl didn't seem helpless. Just still. The man in denim, Harvey, finally spoke up, his voice low but firm. "Let the kid sell her lemonade, Rex." Rex turned halfway toward him, wearing that practiced grin he used when someone tried to challenge him in front of a crowd. "Just keeping her on her toes, Harvey. We're all friends here." Maya didn't correct him. She simply moved another cup into place and set it beside the first, her hands steady. Colt's eyes kept narrowing, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. He'd seen plenty of kids squirm when Rex put on this show. This one, she was different. She didn't move like a kid. She didn't react like a kid. Vince caught Colt watching her and muttered, "What's your deal, man?" Colt didn't answer. The two teens with the bikes were leaning forward now, their wheels angled toward the stand. One of them whispered, "She's waiting for something." It was true. Even in her stillness, there was that faint undercurrent of, not tension, exactly, more like readiness. A delivery driver stepped out of the diner with a bag under his arm. He glanced toward the scene and slowed his pace, recognizing Rex's tone, recognizing the shift in the air. Maya kept her head lowered slightly, letting her hat brim hide most of her face. But under the shadow, her eyes flicked once more toward the far end of the street, the same spot, the one where the truck had gone quiet. The street had settled into a strange kind of quiet. Not silence. There were still the occasional clinks of forks on plates, the hum of conversation, but the sound seemed thinner now, stretched. A man with a camera slung around his neck paused on the sidewalk, halfway to crossing the street. His gaze swept over the stand, the three men in black belts, and then to Maya. He didn't take a picture. Something about the way she was standing made him lower the camera without thinking. From the patio, a younger woman, Erin, wearing a green sundress, leaned toward Harvey. "Who's the kid?" she whispered. Harvey's brow furrowed. "Not sure. But I know what she's not. She's not scared of him." Rex had his hands on his hips now, rocking slightly on his heels like he was getting bored. "All right, little Miss Quiet. Tell you what, we'll give you a chance to make a sale. Show us what you've got. Pour us three." Maya didn't move. "I only sell to paying customers." Colt noticed the way her voice didn't waver, didn't rise or fall like she was guessing what might work. It was the voice of someone who'd said no before and meant it. The cameraman glanced at Lila, the waitress, who was still frozen at the railing. "You gonna step in?" he murmured. Lila shook her head slowly. "Not yet." Two more pedestrians slowed on the opposite sidewalk, pretending to check their phones while watching. The ripple of attention was spreading. Rex tapped the table once with his fingers, the sharp sound cutting through the stillness. "Last chance," he said, smiling without warmth. Maya's gaze didn't shift from his face, but something in her shoulders changed. Not a flinch, not a tense recoil, but a subtle settling. As if she'd decided how this was going to end, even if no one else knew yet. Vince's foot tapped again. His jaw tightened. "Man, I don't like this," he muttered to Colt. Colt's eyes flicked to the end of the street. "Neither do I." And that's when the sound came back. Not the low idle of before, but the short, clean growl of an engine starting up just a block away. Maya's chin lifted almost imperceptibly. The sound of that engine didn't just make her look up. It seemed to anchor her in place, like the rumble was something she recognized. For a moment, her fingers drifted to the cord around her wrist. She tugged it slightly, as though checking it was still there. Under the frayed leather strap was a single, flattened brass button, dulled with age, but polished enough that the light caught its edges. She rolled it between her fingers once, and in her mind, she could hear the low voice of her father. "Don't let them shake you, May. Stillness wins more fights than fists ever will." The memory wasn't sharp or sudden. It came like a photograph she'd looked at too many times. She saw herself younger, sitting on the back steps of a dim boxing gym, her father's gloves hanging on the wall behind him, his hands, big and scarred, tying this very strap around her wrist. "You don't take this off unless you have to." The crowd didn't know any of this. All they saw was a small girl touching an old piece of leather. But Harvey noticed the way she did it, not fidgeting, but like it meant something. Rex leaned forward again. What's that? A good luck charm, he asked, voice dripping with mock curiosity. Maya's hand dropped back to the table. Something like that. Vince's eyes stayed on her wrist. Doesn't look like luck to me. Looks like history. That got Colt's attention. He gave Vince a look, but said nothing. From the patio, Erin tilted her head, studying Maya the way someone studies a painting they can't quite interpret. She's not scared of them, she murmured. She's waiting. The teenagers with the bikes leaned on their handlebars, whispering guesses. A few passers-by had now stopped completely, pretending to check shop windows while stealing glances toward the stand. The engine's hum faded again, replaced by the faint thump of a car door closing somewhere down the street. Maya didn't move, but her fingers pressed flat to the wood of the stand, grounding herself, exactly the way her father had taught her before her first spar. She wasn't thinking about the next words Rex might say. She was thinking about what would happen when he arrived. Rex was still talking, but his words were just noise to her now. The heat of the pavement, the faint tang of lemon in the air, it all blurred into the edges of another place. She was back in that old gym. The heavy bag swung lazily in the corner, smelling of leather and sweat. Dust hung in beams of light cutting through the high windows. Her father's voice was low, almost conversational, but each word felt carved into stone. People swing wild when they think they're winning, May. Your job is to wait. Let him burn their own fire out. Then one clean shot. She remembered watching him wrap his own hands. The pale scars across his knuckles. The way his left eye stayed just a fraction narrower. A memento from a fight he never spoke about. That day, he'd bent down to her level, his own wrist strap dangling loose. This isn't about hitting harder. It's about knowing exactly when to move. In the present, her fingers brushed the strap again, then returned to her side. Colt was staring now, not at her lemonade, but at the way she stood, feet planted shoulder-width, one slightly forward. Not defensive, prepared. Vince shifted uncomfortably. Man, this is getting weird, he muttered to Colt, his voice low enough that Rex didn't hear. Across the street, Harvey caught Lila's eye and tipped his chin toward the far end of the road. She followed his gaze. A figure had stepped out of the parked truck. They couldn't make out his face yet, but even from here, the way he moved, steady, shoulders square, was enough to turn a couple of heads. Friend of yours? Harvey asked under his breath. Lila didn't answer. Her focus was locked on Maya. The girl hadn't turned, hadn't looked, but her posture had shifted. It was subtle, a fraction straighter, a quiet readiness that didn't belong on a 12-year-old. Erin leaned in, her voice low. Why do I feel like something's about to happen? Harvey exhaled slowly. Because it is. Back at the stand, Rex tapped the tabletop again, impatient. Last time I'm asking, kid. Pour the lemonade. Maya's eyes lifted to meet his. Calm. Unblinking. Not for you. The quiet after her words stretched long enough for the sound of a single fork clinking against a plate to carry from the patio. Rex leaned back, folding his arms. Not for me, huh? You think you're too good for... He stopped when Colt's hand touched his arm. Rex. His tone was different. Not nervous exactly, but caution creeping in. What? Rex snapped, irritation flashing. Colt nodded toward her wrist. That strap. I've seen one like it before. Vince raised an eyebrow. On who? Colt hesitated, eyes flicking to Maya, then to the end of the street. Someone you don't want to mess with. From the patio, Harvey's jaw tightened. He murmured to Lila. You know what that is? Lila shook her head. But I know what it means. Meanwhile, the figure from the truck was closer now, still too far for the details of his face, but the walk was unmistakable. Every step was even, measured, like each one carried the same weight. Maya hadn't moved, but her hands were now resting lightly on the edge of the stand, fingertips barely pressing into the wood. If you didn't know what you were looking at, it was nothing. If you did, it was a stance. Colt's voice dropped lower. You don't remember? 3 years ago, the state finals. Rex waved him off. I don't care about. But Colt kept going. The guy who walked through the ring like he owned it. Never smiled, never talked. Won every round before the second minute. Wore the same kind of strap on his wrist. That got Vince's attention. Wait, you mean? Don't say it. Colt cut in sharply, almost too sharply. The kids on the bikes were whispering furiously now, one of them swearing they'd seen that strap before on a poster in the old boxing gym down by the freight yard. Harvey stood from his chair, the legs scraping the patio floor. Well, this is about to get interesting. Down the street, the figure finally stepped off the curb. The sunlight caught the side of his face just enough for Harvey's eyes to widen. At the lemonade stand, Rex still hadn't connected the dots. Yeah? Well, I don't care who she. He didn't finish, because the sound of boots on pavement was getting very, very close. The boots grew louder, but Rex's focus stayed locked on the girl in front of him. He reached into the jar again, this time pulling out not just a bill, but a handful of coins. They clinked together as he let them spill back in, slow, deliberate, his smirk daring her to react. You think you can talk to me like that and just stand there? His tone had shifted, less showman, more edge. Maya didn't move. Her eyes lowered briefly to his hand, then back up to his face. Colt's jaw flexed. Rex. But Rex was already leaning over the table, close enough that his belt brushed the edge of her stand. Tell you what, you pour me one cup. Just one. Or we knock this whole little stand over and call it a day. The sound from the patio flattened, like someone had pressed a mute button. The two boys on the bikes froze mid-whisper. Maya took a slow breath in. When she exhaled, her shoulders lowered slightly, as though she'd just set down a weight she'd been carrying. All right, she said softly. Rex grinned, thinking he'd won. But when we're done, she added, voice still even, you'll apologize. To me. And to everyone here who had to watch this. It wasn't the kind of challenge people were used to hearing. There was no bravado, no heat. Just a statement, like she was reading out the weather. Vince let out a short laugh, but it didn't stick. You serious, kid? Maya didn't answer. She just reached for the pitcher and set it in the center of the table, her hand resting lightly on the handle. Colt looked at her like she'd just laid down a bet no one should take. His gaze darted again to the end of the street. The man from the truck was now less than 100 feet away. From the patio, Harvey muttered, "Oh, he's gonna make it just in time." Rex leaned back, confident again. "Fine, let's do this." The sound of the boots drew closer, each step steady. And still, Maya didn't look. Didn't need to. She had just agreed to the game, but it wasn't going to play out the way Rex thought. The morning sun climbed higher, but the warmth was tempered by an electric tension hanging in the air like a charged wire. Conversations from the diner's patio dulled into murmurs, forks paused mid-air, and eyes turned instinctively toward the quiet corner where Maya stood. The street's usual rhythm faltered, a collective breath held, waiting for something no one could quite name. Rex, sensing the shift, stiffened his spine and smoothed his black belt with a flick of his wrist. His practiced smirk was still there, but the confident edge was softening. "All right, kid," he said, voice a notch cooler now. "Show us what you've got. Pour the lemonade." Maya's hands closed gently around the pitcher handle. Her fingers, slender but steady, lifted with a grace that spoke of control and discipline. The lemonade flowed smoothly into the waiting cup, catching the light like liquid gold. Not a drop spilled. The act was small, but it carried a weight far beyond the stand itself, a quiet declaration of precision, of readiness. The gathered crowd let out a subtle collective sigh. Heads nodded slowly, the impression settling in. This was not a child to be underestimated. Vince leaned close to Colt, voice barely above a whisper. "This ain't just some kid messing around. There's something else here." Colt's gaze never wavered from Maya's calm expression. "Yeah, something we definitely don't want to mess with." Across the street, Harvey's sharp eyes tracked the figure stepping fully from the shadow of the parked truck. Broad shoulders, measured steps, a presence that demanded attention without a word. Each movement was deliberate, controlled, a man used to respect and command. Lila, the waitress who had been frozen moments ago, leaned in, voice low and trembling just slightly. "That's him." Aaron's breath caught. "The champion?" Harvey nodded, eyes fixed on the approaching man. "The one they call the Iron Fist." Maya remained still, untouched by the name, but radiating a calm deeper than before. It was as if her father's silent strength already filled the space beside her. Rex's smirk faltered, the confident showman suddenly uncertain. The story he had rehearsed was unraveling before his eyes. Vince swallowed hard, voice rough. "Maybe we should just." Rex cut him off sharply. "No, we finished this." The tension was palpable now, the entire street a stage for what was about to unfold. Every eye fixed on Maya, the approaching figure, and the unspoken question hanging thick in the air. What happens next? The world around the lemonade stand seemed to contract, the usual noises fading to a distant murmur. The chatter from the diner's patio slowed. The clinking of dishes grew faint, and even the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze was hushed, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Maya shifted slightly, planting her feet firmly on the cracked sidewalk. Her stance was precise, feet shoulder-width apart, one slightly forward, as though rooted by years of quiet discipline. Her hands rested lightly on the weathered wood of the stand, fingertips tracing imperceptible patterns, grounding herself with the familiar texture. Across the street, the figure from the truck approached steadily, his footsteps measured, soft on the concrete. He wore a plain white t-shirt and faded jeans, unassuming in appearance, but his presence carried a quiet authority that seemed to ripple through the gathered crowd. Harvey, seated at the diner patio, sat rigidly, hands clenched in front of him, knuckles white from tension. Lila, the waitress, and Aaron, a nearby patron, exchanged nervous glances, their breathing shallow and unsteady. The silence that had fallen over the street was palpable, thick with unspoken anticipation. Rex shifted uneasily, his confident swagger dimming as he felt the weight of the moment pressing down. The bravado he relied on wavered, replaced by a sharp awareness, a predator sensing that the terrain had changed beneath his feet. He took a tentative step toward Maya, attempting to reclaim control, his voice dropping just enough to hint at threat. But Maya's calm was unshakable. Her gaze flickered toward the street briefly, where the approaching man was now mere yards away. Then her eyes returned to Rex, steady and unflinching. No fear, no desperation, only a quiet, resolute presence that seemed to absorb the tension around her. Colt stood nearby, his fingers twitching slightly, body tense. Vince swallowed hard, voice low, audible only to Colt. This isn't just some street fight. Colt's eyes didn't leave Maya. No, this is a reckoning. The crowd around them held its collective breath. Whispers ceased altogether. The only sound was the steady heartbeat of time moving forward. Maya inhaled slowly, her breath even and measured. Her shoulders relaxed just a fraction, signaling readiness. Almost imperceptibly, she shifted her weight, grounding herself deeper, as if becoming the still center of a swirling storm. The man from the truck reached the curb and slowed, his gaze sweeping over the gathered crowd before locking on Maya. In that charged moment, everything seemed suspended. The street, the sunlight, the gathered faces, all waiting for the next move. The crowd's breath remained suspended, as if the world itself had paused to watch. The soft rustle of leaves in the late morning breeze was the only sound that dared break the stillness, but even that seemed cautious, gentle, like nature was tiptoeing around the moment. Maya's gaze flickered once more toward the man steadily approaching from the far end of the street. His stride was calm, measured, the kind that spoke of a lifetime spent mastering control over both body and mind. The sun caught the slight glint of a dog tag resting beneath his collar, a subtle but unmistakable token. Her eyes then shifted back to Rex, who stood mere feet away, his jaw clenched tightly. His confidence, once as brash and loud as thunder, now sounded more like the faint rumble of distant clouds. Every muscle in his face twitched, betraying a wariness that hadn't been there moments before. The din of the diner's patio had quieted to a near whisper. Harvey sat rigid in his chair, fingers steepled as he watched the unfolding scene. Lila's grip tightened around the edge of a weathered table, her knuckles white and trembling just slightly. Aaron's eyes were wide, a mixture of awe and apprehension reflected there. Colt and Vince exchanged a look, heavy with silent understanding. This wasn't just a simple confrontation. This was something deeper, rooted in unspoken history, silent strength, and perhaps years of battles fought outside public view. Maya's hands rested lightly on the stand's worn wood, fingers twitching with a barely perceptible tension beneath her calm exterior. She inhaled slowly, the air filling her lungs deliberately, then exhaled in a controlled release. Settling the weight, she carried across her slender shoulders. Rex took a tentative step forward, desperate to reclaim his fading hold over the moment. But his eyes flicked involuntarily to the approaching figure, and for the first time, the familiar smirk cracked, revealing a flicker of doubt. The man reached the edge of the sidewalk, standing tall with quiet authority. His face was marked by lines earned in countless battles, eyes sharp and steady as they met Maya's unwavering gaze. No words passed between them, but the silence screamed of respect, of history, of power shared but unspoken. Maya straightened subtly, her posture a silent testament to strength drawn not from aggression, but from resolve. Shoulders back, spine firm, she seemed to draw invisible strength from the presence beside her. The street was a frozen tableau. No one dared to move or speak. The tension hung, fragile yet undeniable, pregnant with the promise of what was to come. The morning sun cast long, slow shadows across the cracked pavement, framing the narrow space where Maya stood like a quiet island in a restless sea. Around her, the world seemed to shrink. Noises dimmed, conversations hushed, and the distant city sounds faded to a muted backdrop, as if time itself had slowed to witness the unfolding moment. Maya's eyes remained locked on the figure, now only feet away. Their gaze met with a weightless but undeniable connection, a silent conversation born of shared understanding, respect, and histories that words could never capture. The faintest shift in her posture spoke volumes, shoulders straightened, chest rising with steady confidence, spine unwavering. No longer a child behind a lemonade stand, she had become a presence, calm, controlled, and deeply grounded. Rex, once so bold and certain, faltered in his stance. His breath caught, just briefly, betraying the cracks in his confident mask. He straightened his back and squared his shoulders, fighting to hold on to the bravado that had kept him dominant. But the subtle change in the atmosphere was unmistakable. The tide was turning. Colt exchanged a knowing glance with Vince, who murmured softly under his breath, "This is it, something's about to break." From the diner's patio, Harvey leaned forward, knuckles whitening as he gripped the arms of his chair. Lila's fingers tightened around the edge of a table, her face a mix of anticipation and fear. Aaron's eyes were wide, caught between awe and uncertainty. Even the stray dog padding past seemed to sense the charged air, its quiet footsteps swallowed by the heavy stillness. Maya's fingers curled slightly around the worn wood of the lemonade stand. She drew in a slow, measured breath, the faintest tremor of anticipation rippling beneath her calm exterior. Her face was serene, almost solemn, reflecting the lessons carved deep within her: control, patience, and inner strength. Beside her, the man who had come to her defense stood with quiet grace. His hands hung loosely at his sides, but his presence radiated an iron resolve beneath a soft exterior. He was the silent anchor to the storm gathering around them. The crowd held its collective breath, the seconds stretching, each heartbeat a slow drum in the thickening air. Then, with precise intention, Maya shifted her weight forward, planting her front foot firmly, every movement deliberate. Her hands lifted slightly, palms open and relaxed, a gesture that spoke not of aggression, but readiness. Her eyes sharpened, taking in every detail: the street, the faces, the charged silence enveloping them. Her guardian mirrored her movement, grounding the space with steady authority. The street seemed to freeze, hanging on the edge of a moment that promised to shatter silence and reclaim justice. The morning air hung heavy, charged with anticipation as the man beside Maya stepped forward with quiet, unyielding purpose. His movements were deliberate and controlled, each step echoing the weight of years spent mastering restraint and precision. There was no haste, no flash, only the steady certainty of someone who knew exactly what needed to be done. Rex, once brimming with cocky arrogance, suddenly faltered. His lips parted, ready to hurl another insult or challenge, but the words caught in his throat. The bravado that had shielded him melted away under the man's unwavering gaze. A flicker of doubt, and perhaps fear, passed through his eyes. The crowd held its breath, the tension stretching taut like a wire about to snap. Eyes locked on the shrinking space between Rex and the figure standing firm, radiating calm strength. Then, with the precision of a seasoned craftsman, the man's hand shot out, not in fury or reckless aggression, but in a swift, controlled motion that spoke of years of disciplined training. His fingers closed lightly around Rex's wrist, halting the raised arm mid-strike with effortless authority. There was no struggle, no loud clash, only the quiet power of mastery over force. The move was measured, deliberate, a message clear as thunder beneath a calm sky. This ends now. The crowd gasped in unison, the collective intake of breath a sudden rupture in the silence. The shift in power was undeniable, palpable, a tidal wave that swept away the mockery and doubt that had filled the air moments before. Rex staggered backward, his confident smirk shattered into stunned disbelief. His shoulders sagged as the crushing weight of realization settled in. He was face to face with a man whose reputation preceded him like a shadow. Maya remained perfectly still, her calm unbroken, eyes locked on her father. His presence was a quiet fortress around her, the embodiment of a legacy built not on spectacle, but on discipline, precision, and honor. Around them, the antagonists shifted uneasily, the atmosphere thick with the sudden understanding that this was no ordinary confrontation. The spectators, too, felt the shift. Those who had laughed now looked on with reverence and awe. Without a word, the man released Rex's wrist and stepped back. The message was clear, the harassment was over. The street held a profound silence, as if acknowledging the invisible history unveiled that morning, not through violent spectacle, but through measured strength and unwavering dignity. A stunned silence spread through the crowd like a sudden gust of cold wind. Rex, once so loud and brash, now stood frozen, his chest rising and falling unevenly as disbelief and shock settled heavily on his shoulders. The arrogance that had filled the air moments ago was replaced by a tangible weight of defeat. The man who had stepped in remained calm and collected, his posture relaxed yet undeniably authoritative. His eyes swept across the crowd with quiet assurance, holding the space like a sentinel guarding something precious. The subtle gleam of an old, worn dog tag peeked from beneath his shirt collar, catching the sunlight and drawing attention to a legacy that was both visible and deeply hidden. Maya's gaze never wavered. Her face held a quiet strength, the kind that comes from knowing who you are and where you come from. She stood beside her father like a shadow anchored to an unbreakable foundation. Among the bystanders, a ripple of realization began to spread. Whispers started, soft but growing louder as people connected the dots. That's the Iron Fist," one voice broke out, hushed but urgent. "Legend says he never lost a fight." Another murmured, eyes wide with awe. Photos flickered in memories, newspaper clippings pinned on gym walls, grainy videos of a man dominating ring after ring, a fighter who carried a silent dignity that commanded respect far beyond the sport. Even the antagonists, caught in the tide of revelation, faltered. Their sneers melted away, replaced by unease and reluctant respect. Rex's face paled as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. He had crossed a line not just against a girl selling lemonade, but against a legacy of power and honor. One of the younger boys on the bike whispered to another, "We messed up. Big time." Harvey, the older man from the diner patio, shook his head slowly, a grim smile tugging at his lips. "Some lessons you learn the hard way." The street remained hushed, the energy transformed. What began as petty harassment had shifted into a moment of collective reckoning. The crowd's attitude evolved, from mockery to awe, from dismissal to deep respect. Maya's father took a measured step back, signaling the end of the confrontation. There was no need for grand gestures or dramatic words. The silence spoke volumes. Rex, still reeling, looked down at the cracked pavement, the weight of what had just happened settling like a stone in his chest. The bystanders exchanged glances, many changed in that instant. Witnesses to a quiet justice reclaimed. The tension in the air remained thick, but something profound had settled over the street. A quiet, unspoken acknowledgement that the balance had irrevocably changed. The crowd, once brash and mocking, now washed with a mixture of reverence and disbelief. Faces that had worn smirks were now subdued, eyes wide with a dawning understanding of the history unfolding before them. Rex stood, motionless and shaken, his usual swagger replaced by a heavy silence. He glanced around, searching for support among his companions, but found only the weight of their own discomfort reflected back. Their bravado, once so loud, had been stripped bare. Across the street, Maya remained steady, her hands folded lightly on the lemonade stand. The calm dignity she carried was no longer just an act. It was a living truth, reflected in every breath she took. Her father's gaze swept the crowd with a quiet intensity. His presence was not of a man seeking glory, but of someone who understood the gravity of what had transpired, a protective force that had long been underestimated. Slowly, one bystander, a middle-aged man with a weathered face and thoughtful eyes, stepped forward. His voice was low but carried unmistakable respect. "That's James Iron Fist Callahan," he said, the name hanging heavy in the morning air. The undefeated boxing champion. A legend who fought not just for titles, but for honor. The crowd murmured, pieces of the story falling into place. Some nodded in quiet reverence. Others lowered their gaze, humbled. Rex swallowed hard, the realization dawning like a cold wave. He had challenged not just a girl, but a legacy, and now he understood the depth of the mistake he had made. Maya's eyes met her father's briefly, a silent exchange passing between them. Strength, resilience, and the quiet justice of their shared history. No one spoke for a long moment. The street seemed suspended in time, a space where respect had been reclaimed not through loud victory, but through presence and quiet power. Finally, the man known as Callahan took a step back, signaling the end of the confrontation without a word. The message was clear. This chapter was closed. As the crowd began to disperse, the atmosphere had shifted permanently. The lesson lingered. Respect, honor, and dignity were not given lightly, but earned through quiet strength and unwavering resolve. The street remained still as the crowd absorbed the weight of what had just unfolded. The name James, Iron Fist, Callahan echoed in the air, reverberating through the minds of every witness, casting a new light on everything they had seen. Rex stood silently, the color drained from his face, his earlier arrogance replaced by a hollow understanding. He was no longer the center of attention. He had become a cautionary tale, a reminder of the consequences that come with disrespect. Nearby, Colt lowered his gaze, running a hand through his hair as if trying to process the sudden shift. Vince remained tense, shoulders squared but eyes softened by the gravity of the moment. Even the antagonists who had surrounded Rex found themselves silent, humbled. Lila wiped a tear from her cheek, her voice barely a whisper. "I remember seeing his fights on TV, undefeated, relentless, but never without respect." Harvey nodded slowly, eyes glinting with a mixture of pride and sadness. Callahan's strength was never just his fists. It was his honor, his discipline. That's what protected his family, and now his daughter. Maya watched quietly, her expression calm but heavy with unspoken history. She touched the edge of the lemonade stand, feeling the rough wood beneath her fingers, grounding herself in the present. Her father's legacy was not just in the ring. It was in every quiet sacrifice, every lesson passed down with love and resilience. Suddenly, a gentle voice broke the silence. It was Maya herself, soft but clear. "Thank you," she said, her words carrying the weight of all she had endured. "For standing with me." Her father stepped forward, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "You never had to stand alone." The crowd shifted, a collective sense of closure settling like a gentle tide. Some began to applaud quietly, others simply nodded, their respect deepened by the shared experience. Rex finally spoke, his voice low and sincere. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." It wasn't an excuse, it was a moment of reckoning. Maya nodded, accepting the apology without bitterness. Respect is earned, and it's never too late to learn. The street, once a stage for mockery and challenge, had become a place of reflection and understanding. The story of a young girl and her father's legacy had transformed those present, a quiet reminder that true strength often lies beneath the surface, waiting to be recognized. The morning light softened as the crowd began to disperse, leaving behind a quiet stillness that felt less like an ending and more like a new beginning. Maya remained at the lemonade stand, her hands folded gently in front of her, the tension in her shoulders finally easing. Around her, the hum of everyday life resumed, but something intangible had shifted. Respect had been reclaimed, not through anger or spectacle, but through quiet strength and unwavering dignity. Rex lingered nearby, no longer brash or confrontational. His eyes met Maya's for a long moment, a flicker of genuine remorse passing between them. "I was wrong," he said quietly, voice stripped of its former arrogance. "You deserved better." Maya's expression softened, but she made no grand gestures of forgiveness. Instead, her voice was steady, measured. "Respect isn't given freely. It's earned, through who we are and how we carry ourselves." Her father stood silently behind her, a steady presence of strength and grace. His eyes held pride, not just for the legacy he carried, but for the resilience and humility of the young girl beside him. Harvey, watching from the diner's patio, shook his head with a small, approving smile. "That's the lesson, right there," he murmured to Lila. "Strength without humility isn't strength at all." The crowd that remained began to nod in quiet agreement. The morning's events had become more than a simple confrontation. They were a lesson in honor, dignity, and the power of restraint. Maya took a slow breath and looked out over the street, the sunlight catching the subtle scars on her hands. Marks of battles both past and present, visible and invisible. Each one told a story of survival, sacrifice, and quiet courage. Turning back to Rex, she offered a small, sincere nod. "Learn from this," she said, "and carry that respect forward." Rex nodded, a weight lifting from his shoulders. "I will." Her father stepped forward then, his voice calm but firm. "True strength isn't about proving you're the best by fighting others. It's about knowing when to stand your ground and when to protect those who can't." Maya smiled faintly, the kind of smile that spoke of hope and hard-earned wisdom. As the crowd slowly dispersed, the lemonade stand remained, a humble symbol of resilience in a world that often overlooked quiet strength. The morning had begun with mockery but ended with a restored sense of justice and dignity, a reminder that the most profound victories are often the ones won without a single raised fist. 3 months had passed since that unforgettable morning. The small street corner where Maya once sold lemonade had quietly transformed. The stand was still there, worn but sturdy, but now it bore a fresh coat of paint, bright yellow with green trim, a small plaque at its edge reading, "Strength in Quiet Courage." Maya stood behind the stand, but she was no longer just the quiet girl who endured mockery. She had grown into something more, a young woman carrying the weight of her father's legacy with grace and humility. Her clothes were simple but neat, a soft, pale blue blouse and dark jeans, sleeves rolled up just enough to reveal the faint scars on her wrists, a testament to both her past and her resilience. Around her, neighbors and passers-by smiled with newfound respect. Children lingered to listen when she spoke, her voice steady and warm as she shared stories of discipline, honor, and strength not measured by violence, but by presence. At her side was Harvey, now her mentor and friend, who helped organize community classes in self-defense and respect. The diner where he worked had become a hub of quiet transformation, its walls decorated with photos of local heroes and moments of courage. Rex, once an antagonist fueled by arrogance, had returned, not as an adversary, but as a humbled student. He stood a few feet away, watching Maya with something akin to admiration. His own clothes had changed, more modest, less showy, and his eyes held a new depth, reflecting lessons learned the hard way. Maya caught his gaze and nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of change and growth. There was no bitterness, only a shared understanding that respect was a journey, not a destination. Her father's legacy lingered in every corner, not just as a story told in whispers or headlines, but as a living, breathing force in the community. Though he no longer stood visibly by her side, his presence was felt in every lesson she taught, every calm decision she made. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, Maya closed the stand and looked out over the street, a place where hardship had once taken root but now blossomed with quiet strength. She whispered softly to herself, "It's not the fights we win with our fists, but the ones we win with our hearts that define us." And with that, she stepped forward, ready to face whatever came next, grounded by history, courage, and the unbreakable bond of legacy. Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Stay tuned for more immersive tactical stories.